So first of all, it's a big honor. Thank you, Rabbi, for coming on. For me personally, a big inspiration to me when I was in yeshiva. We had an extensive English library. So not having read very many books in my life because I was one of those teenagers, it was a big simcha to be able to pick up Rabbi Twersky's books. Thank you very much for that. So I guess we're going to just ask a few questions to hear a little bit about Rabbi Twersky's background, a bit about Israel Aliyah, teenagers, and some of the work maybe that Hakshiva does and how they fill a special role in the community. Would you be able to describe a little bit about your upbringing and your background?
I did that in a book. The book was titled Generation to Generation. There I describe pretty much my father's home and also some of the circumstances. I was born and raised in Milwaukee. And my father had Hasidim of the older generation, but there was no chinuch in the town, except for after school bar mitzvah class. So I had no Jewish friends. There's only one other, of my age, there was only one other Shomer Shabbos boy in town. And so I went to public school.
How does the son of a Rav survive in public school? Presumably you didn't look like the other kids.
No problem, it was great. After my mitzvah, I went to yeshiva in Chicago, which was very productive. And then after several years, my oldest brother was all in Denver. I went to Denver, spent a year with him learning Yeridaya. I don't know that how much affected I was by being in public school, but although obviously it gave me a much broader appreciation of the world.
Is that maybe how that began the journey of moving towards the psychiatry path that you've taken in life that you may never have necessarily come to had you not have been through that public school system?
I don't know if that had much to do with it. See, my father was a Hasidic Rabbi, and his study was always full of people who were there asking for advice and guidance. He was a natural-born therapist. Not trained, but natural-born. And I envisioned myself, he envisioned me, I was the third son, that I would take over the shul. The only thing is that after I got through with him, and I became assistant and rabbi in his shul, I realized that times had changed. The generation of my father's generation had turned to him for counseling. But after World War II, psychiatry and psychology had a major rise. And it became clear to me after being the rabbi for a few years, my parishioners were not looking for me to teach them Torah. The adult education was not popular in 1951. So what was I going to do? I had no one to teach Torah to. What I was going to do as a rabbi, I was going to do the ceremonials, the bar mitzvahs and the weddings and the funerals and the unveilings or whatever. But I was not going to be able to do what my father did, because the people, instead of going to the law, were going to the professional counselor. And so I realized that in order to do what I wanted to do what my father did, I have to become a professional counselor. either psychologist or psychiatrist. It so happened, everything is Hakshiva, that year, the medical school in Milwaukee, which had been a 6-day-a-week school, changed to 5 days a week.
Okay.
Had no Shabbos problems. So I went to medical school, and then I went on to psychiatry. I went to Pittsburgh for psychiatric training, and I stayed in Pittsburgh for 40 years.
When did you turn your hand to writing books? I tried to look online the other day to see how many books you've written, and I don't think the screen was able to contain on it in one go how many books you've written.
85.
Even 85 books. That's at least 85 more than I've written. When did you first feel I have to write a book?
I was in my second year of psychiatric training, and my mentor in psychiatry was a very excellent person. And I wrote something, and I gave it to him, and he said, Abe, don't publish it. Put it aside for 10 years. And he was right. Because 10 years later, I realized that would have been a serious mistake to have published it. Then I wrote the first book on self-esteem. It became obvious to me from the beginning that the key issue in human life is self-esteem. So I wrote a book called Like Yourself and Others Will Too. And it was refused by 17 publishers. And the 18th one took it.
What?
Once I had a book published, it was easier to get the second book published.
Okay.
And et cetera, et cetera. So it fed on itself.
How did you get to the feeling of I have a book inside me, I have to get another book out? I mean, 85 books is a lot of books.
Yeah, you have a feeling just like a composer has a melody that he has to get out.
Because nowadays, if you talk about self-esteem to people, they say, "Oh, of course, yes, self-esteem. Everything revolves around self-esteem." But I'm guessing that in the 1970s, people weren't. It wasn't part of everyone's lexicon to the same extent.
Yeah, right. I became obsessed with the idea that all of the patients that I saw, whatever else was the problem, whatever else was bothering them, they all had unfortunate low self-esteem. They were very capable people, but they didn't see it. They didn't see anything good about themselves. So I started writing about self-esteem.
You noticed it was a common thread among whatever various different things you saw. Okay, and I guess that, and having been brought up probably in the home that you were brought up in, and the perspective that you had, that the concept of self-esteem, you didn't have to look very deeply into Sfarim to see eventually that somebody spoke about the idea of, whether it's in Sifrei Hasidus or Musa, whatever it might be, the idea of believing in yourself. And like these you mentioned before that your own father was basically a very accomplished counselor without ever having gone through any formal training. We have this very rooted in our tradition. So I assume that for you it was a very beautiful marriage of worlds.
Right.
And do you have a favorite of the books that you've written? And I guess you got plenty to choose from in the 85.
Well, I mentioned before, Generation to Generation, which is my childhood and my father's home, and that was my favorite.
Did you ever encounter that people didn't know what to do when they met you and by your appearance and say, hang on a minute, you're a...
No, strangely enough, that didn't happen.
Okay.
Right? Especially with patients. When patients came to see me, I did not notice that they were taken back.
I know that you must have hundreds, maybe thousands of also almost amusing stories, but do you have a funny story from your professional experiences?
Yeah, there's some stories. I can't think of too many. I remember once I was taking care of a woman who was a severe diabetic, and she had gone into diabetic coma. And as I was treating her, eventually she came out of it, and she opened her eyes and she saw me. Now she was a devout Catholic woman, and her reaction was, it was a German woman. Ach ja, it's schon gekommen. You thought I was Jesus who had come.
I thought you were the Messiah incarnate. Now, you currently live in Israel?
I came to Israel about 4 years ago.
4 years ago. Okay. And did you always know that you wanted to live in Israel, or?
Yes, even before that, I used to come to Israel 4 months a year. 2 months for Pesach and 2 months for Chagim. So that was for many years. And I knew I was going to eventually come to Israel. Finally, I made Aliyah 4 years ago.
When you look around you here in Israel and you see, I mean, many olim here, saying Ramat Bet Shemesh, plenty of olim. Clearly, there's a challenge going to live in any new country, but particularly for olim and maybe their children, their teenage children. What are some of the significant challenges that you feel that?
For many, it's understandable a culture shock, and it depends where they stand on the spectrum of Torah observance. For example, I went to public school and I went to college. My grandchildren are not going to college. The educational system, I can't speak it authoritatively because I'm not familiar with the system here. But I think that in general, it leaves a lot to be desired. And this is one of the things that I would like to talk about to the group. And that is that people have the idea that the yeshiva, the prime purpose of the yeshiva is to transmit the Torah knowledge. It's very interesting that the Chaim Vital, who's the successor of the Arizal, asks, why is it that the Torah does not specifically talk about midos? And he says that midos could not be prescribed in the Torah because they must be a precursor to Torah. Therefore, I think that education is important and knowledge is important, but you have to be a mensch in order to have Torah. Right? And unfortunately, it happens too often that people are, even they become knowledgeable in Torah, they're seriously lacking in midas. So Chaim Vital says that he makes a bold statement. He says it is midos are more important than mitzvahs. And it's a very bold statement. And not enough is being done about that. Yes, there's some formal learning of Musa, but I think that the Rosh Yeshivas still see their prime purpose is to transmit knowledge. Right?
Yep.
And my way of thinking is that that's important, but it's secondary. Especially in an age where you can get knowledge without having a teacher. Right? You have so many technical technological ways of knowledge, and the prime purpose of the teacher should be to help a person become a mensch. And only then can the Torah be useful. I'm thinking about one incident that I had. Most of my work in later years was treating addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction. There are groups for the alcoholic and for the drug addicts. There are also groups for family members. And initially I was told that it's more important for the family to get proper knowledge and proper treatment than for the patient. And there's some truth to that. But let me give you a little example, though, of something that was very impressive to me. At one group, a woman gave her history. She was married to an attorney who was a judge, and he was a very bad alcoholic. Later on, he got sober. She had tried to get pregnant, and she couldn't get pregnant. And she went to various doctors, and her family doctor took all the information together, and he said, "Nell, you're going to have to accept this. You will never be able to carry a child." And she says that was devastating to her. But in the meantime, her husband got sober, went to Alcoholics Anonymous. She says, when I turned 40, I decided it's time to stop smoking. So I gave up cigarettes. And then after a few months, I started having some weird reactions. So I went back to the doctor, and I found out I was pregnant. This was a miracle. And the alcoholics very often talk about the miracles that happen to the alcoholic. So this was a miracle that happened to me. And I knew that it was going to be a boy, and I knew that he's going to be a Rhodes Scholar like his father. She said, for many years, I thought that I had dealt very well with controlling my feelings and my anger. But it all came back the first time the nurse put the baby in my arms. He was a Down syndrome. And I said, God, why did you do this to me? We adopted 2 children, right? And I resigned myself that I was not going to be able to have a biological child. And then you build up my expectations. Right? And then you hit me with this. Anyway, one of the things you said was, when I sit in the chair and I hold Chrissy in my arms, and I see how he's defective, his facial features are different. She said, I realized that if that child didn't come into the world for anything else except what I'm going to tell you now, it was all worth it. Because when I sit and hold a child and I see his defects, and I realize how much I love that child with all his defects, that's when I can understand how God can love me with all my defects. You see, one of the things that I found about working with alcoholics is that they have gone so far off that when they recover, they develop a spirituality that even some from people don't have. And so the issue of self-esteem has been central in my mind. Some people have asked me, how could you write so many books? I said, I did not write many books. I wrote one book in 85 different ways. Because everything I wrote is on the issue of self-esteem. We are all delusional, negatively delusional. We don't see ourselves as we really are. And of course, that has an effect on our children as well. And so it's the central issue of education that I think needs to be addressed.
Rabbi Twersky, not long ago, used to be a teenager himself. You have a good teenage story?
Yeah, I was pretty much of an American teenager. I went to ball games. I loved baseball. I love football. I still do. Unfortunately, now I'm wheelchair bound. You see, I think that our teenagers are living in a very difficult world. Never before has the world been as hedonistic as now. And too many people have, as a goal of life and as aspirations, getting all the fun and pleasure that they want. And that has to lead to disillusion and disappointment. Because like any other addiction, it can never be satisfied. No matter how much you get, it's not enough. And so people are missing happiness. And I don't know that many teenagers today are happy.
Right. They don't know to distinguish between having a good time and being happy.
Right.
Right.
And I would say, even in the yeshivas, there are many yeshivas where Friday night, the boys get together and drink. And they don't drink because they're happy. Alcohol is an anesthetic. You know, I tell people how different our Rosh Hashanah is from the secular New Year. Right? Comes December 31st, midnight, people gotta get drunk and scream Happy New Year. I said, alcohol is a sedative, an anesthetic, and it kills your feelings. Now, if you're really that happy about the new year, why do you have to drink to forget it?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what the reason is. I said, generally we walk along in our daily life and we don't take time to figure out where we're going. And when the new year hits, we say, wait a minute, what's coming up here? 2019 is just over? I thought it just began. Right? No. 2020. I'm a year older. Am I better off financially? No. Am I healthier? No. Do I have any legitimate reason to expect that 2020 is going to be appreciably better? No. So it becomes a very depressing moment to realize that a year of my life is gone and I have nothing to show for it. And I don't think that any reason that next year is going to be any better. So what do? You got to numb the pain, so you drink. Rosh Hashanah, we don't numb the pain. Rosh Hashanah comes after Chodesh Elul, Selsi Mitshuva, Cheshbon HaNefesh, recognize where our faults have been and what we can do to correct them so the next year can be a better year. We don't have to drink to get happy.
I'm just wondering how Rabbi Twersky thinks maybe that's affected people in their own personal well-being or mental health in this period of time where they've all been immobilized for a period of time.
Yeah, no question it's affected people. Right? Being quarantined is very difficult. And it's very depressing. And unfortunately, Shalombay's problems have increased. And we're not at the end of it yet.
Right? We might even be in early days. We don't know yet.
I haven't been out of the house except this morning. There's a street minion down the block. That's my experience of being out of the house. And the house is locked up. Right? Nobody comes in.
We are talking in the context of an evening that's happening for Hakshiva, the organization in the neighborhoods that's trying to continue the amazing work they do. To what extent do you think that Hakshiva, as an organization, could be part of the solution?
Chinuch, the focus of Chinuch is that a child should have a sense of worth, of self-worth, self-esteem. That's the core of everything. I have a little story that I love to tell. When I was 9 or 10 years old, I was a chess champion. Now anybody can beat me. At that point, my father's show at that point in the 1930s had a lot of Russian Jews, and they were good chess players. And eventually I beat them all. For Rosh Hashanah, one Rosh Hashanah, we had a guest from Chicago. And so Rosh Hashanah afternoon, he said to me, "You want to play chess?" I said, "Yom Tov." He says, "So what's wrong with playing chess on Yom Tov?" Okay. Well, the host said it's permissible. So I played them 2 games and I beat them soundly, both games. The second night of Rosh Hashanah, the Rabbi comes over and he says, "The Rebbe wants to see you in his study." I came in and my father was looking at his sefer. No, he didn't come in and say, "Hey, Dad, what do you want?" It's not the way it went. I came in and I stood there silently, waiting to be acknowledged. My father looked up from the sefer and he said to me, "You played chess on Rosh Hashanah?" I said, "Yeah, the Rav said that you're allowed to." He didn't say anything. He looked back into his sefer, and almost imperceptibly, that's all I got. A little shaking of the head. But I got the message. The Rav was right. Technically, it's permissible. But I should have understood that Rosh Hashanah is not a day for playing games. And that was wrong. Okay. So I got my discipline, but I can't leave the office and study until my father says, "Get yourself to hate," go ahead. So I stood there waiting. After a few minutes, he looked up from the sefer, smiling a little bit. Said, "Did you beat him?" I said, "Twice. Gig is in the head." That's the perfect example of chinuch. Letting the child know that what he did not approve of what he did, but you're not going to let him leave the room feeling badly about himself. Today's teenagers are, plus, look, we've got such technological advantages that have ruined our interpersonal relationships. For a group of kids to get together is what? You get together and each one is holding his smartphone and nobody's talking to each other. Okay? So, we really give interpersonal relationships a difficult challenge with the smartphone. And today's teenagers, again, I think the role of the mechanech is transmitting knowledge is secondary. The role of the mechanech is that the students should have a feeling of worthiness, chashivut, that a person must develop a sense of chashivut. And there's so many things that interfere with a person developing chashivut and not adequate steps. So when I saw one day a book advertised, Building Self-Esteem in Children, I grabbed it and read it, and I think it's a Bible. The author says, if you've given your children everything but not self-esteem, you've given them nothing. Now the thing is that you cannot give children self-esteem. What you can do is you can make an environment that is conducive to their developing self-esteem, but you can't give it to them. And I think that's true from the home, and it's true in the educational system. And if they don't get that, then they're high risk for getting off the derech. They're high risk for getting alcohol, or high risk for getting into drugs, high risk for getting into gambling.
And I guess their framework of reference is so different. I mean, I was speaking to a boy who must be now about 20 years old, and he said to me a remarkable thing, and it's really struck me. He said to me, I couldn't imagine watching a movie if I wasn't high.
Right.
And to me, I mean, I have a lot of people memorize Sfarim. I have a lot of movies swirling around in this organ up there. The whole point of entertainment is that it maybe you enjoy it. You enjoy it for what it is. The fact that nowadays even something as basic as entertainment can't even be contemplated unless you're in some kind of imposed chemical state. I find it's just a framework of reference that is just so alien to me. I just wonder. I find it mind-boggling that even basic things like, I mean, as Twersky said before, what was one point of time called dibuk chaverim is now, you could just put a bunch of smartphones on the table and the chaverim can leave, because that's really where the dibuk happens. And again, I think the idea also, even just of entertainment, is just basic leisure activities people can't even do without being in some other advanced chemical state.
Right. They're running away from themselves.
So an organization that provides them that environment to be with themselves and being nurtured and accepting for who they are.
This medidut that we've been forced into has hit that vulnerability.
Right. Rabbi, I really want to thank you for your time. Really, for me, it was a big covered to be able to speak to you and continue to inspire us.
We'll try.
Please, God. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi. I really appreciate it.
Kol tov.
Kol tov.